Walter had, it's hard to put, I want to elaborate some more on how almost the genius of the ideas that came out of that man. Now, I think you're too modest to the fact that certainly you made a contribution to those ideas and developed them. How about his staff work? Did he encourage people to come up with ideas, Walter?
Always. Nat Weinberg, who was at first the director of the research department.
Yes.
At some point he said, look, I don't want to do this administrative work, I want to do thinking. So we brought him up to the president's office, and his task essentially was to deal with the economics of the nation and the world and come up with ideas. But one thing about Walter, which was so interesting and fascinating, is that if he did come up with a notion, he loved to have you come in and tell you, I've got an idea and I want you to oppose it. And we would sit there for hours on end, either at his home or in his office. And I would play the devil's advocate, so to speak. And he did that with other staff people. The idea being that he was testing his notion, his ideas, and at the point we had something to say which might cause him to change it in some fashion, he would give it deep thought.
He didn't feel threatened by your challenging him.
Quite the contrary. He invited people to come in and tell him what they think.
Now, you and Nat Weinberg played that role. Did Jack Conway, was he involved?
Before, Jack was the administrative assistant to Walter before I became his assistant. And when Jack left to join the National Office of HUD is when I was invited to take his place. But that was typical of Walter, that he wanted to have in-depth conversations and discussions about ideas and notions. You know, even with regard to the slogans that we put up on the convention, I would write many of them when I was his assistant in advance of the convention and bring them to him. And we would just sit for, you know, minutes and minutes on end talking about the right words to use. And one of my favorite little anecdotes about Walter was we always kidded him about the fact that he could never say something in brief.
Yes.
You know, they used to take bets on how long his speeches would be.
I think Abel's asking what time it was. He said how to make a watch.
That's right. Well, on this particular occasion, we were in national negotiations, and we settled. And we had to send a telegram to the local unions about their turn now to get into negotiations, etc. So Walter asked me to write up the telegram, and I did, and I gave it to him, and he said, it's too long. I said, well, you know, if you think it's too long, why don't you take a shot at it? We ended up betting 5 cents that when he got through, his would be more wordy than mine. He beat me by 1 word.
By 1 word.
Yes.
Now, another thing, I felt that Horace Sheffield was given a great free hand on the whole field of race relations, and Horace believed in real integration in the best sense. Is that?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that a correct?
Yes.
And that Walter backed up Horace when he was doing very active, and a lot of the, I'd say, members from the Deep South were not particularly sympathetic. Is that a safe statement?
Yes, it's a safe statement, but as I pointed out earlier, our members in the South and the leadership in the South didn't protest vigorously against our convention resolutions or anything like that, because they knew what we could do at the bargaining table. But with regard to Horace, it wasn't Horace alone. Bill Oliver was director of our department in that regard. Horace was, of course, extremely active in the community, in the development of organization as well as within the union. And I might tell you that at one point in the 1950s, Walter specifically asked Leonard Woodcock to put Horace on his staff. And then Horace had freedom to get done what he felt was vitally important. And he did a magnificent job.
I had planned to interview Horace, and I talked to him very recently, and I'm just very sorry. I think I had a great respect for him.
Well, now, I attended the memorial service, and it was really an occasion.
Now, as far as the role of women, certainly there's a certain amount of male chauvinism, and there's a certain amount of Archie Bunker. Now, what was a role of Millie Jeffrey? Was she given somewhat of a free hand in the sense that Horace Sheffield was on women's right, or Odessa, or the head of the recreation department?
Olga Madar.
Olga Madar, I knew very well.
Actually, it was Olga who was the mainspring of our efforts within the Union for the whole feminist movement. Millie Jeffrey was active in the Democratic Party primarily, and did a lot of good work in that area. But as far as internal Union efforts were concerned, Olga Madar was, as I said, the mainspring. And she was put in charge of the women's department when we first organized the women's department as a separate department from citizenship, and did an outstanding job in pulling that together and making it an effective instrument within the framework of the Union as a whole, with the full support of Walter and the officers.
Olga developed an excellent women's family camp at the FDR. She did an excellent job there.
Yeah.
I was very, very fond of her. So I think really that Walter not only did a good job, but he had that ability to, well, Guy Nunn was another person that
That's right.
was a very unusual person, very competent, that I get, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Walter was not only competent himself, but he was not, what is the Peter principle? You hire people dumber than you are. Well, maybe it's hard to find people smarter than Walter, but he did not feel threatened by having competent people around him.
Quite the contrary. Walter wanted competent people and extraordinary people around him, in my judgment, because they had ideas which he fed upon, or his own ideas were fed to them, and he wanted reaction. Guy Nunn, as you know, during World War II was a captive of the Germans, and he escaped. He was a remarkable individual, and then headed up our radio department. We had regular radio programs, we had regular TV programs. Eventually they became too costly, and we also got so much opposition from the field within the telecommunications area that we finally had to eliminate it.
What was the opposition?
Oh, we had trouble getting radio stations to accept our program.
To accept it?
Even when we paid for it.
It went from Canada for a while, didn't you?
The TV program went from Canada.
The TV was the only one you could get.
Yeah. And the radio programming, we had difficulty trying to get into cities where we had a good number of our own members. So it was a constant hassle. Yeah.
But I think that the contribution there that was made, it's now again people say, what would Walter do if he were alive today? I think that's too simple a question. While there isn't a great man theory of history, but certainly Walter made a contribution, and you were a very integral part of that. I think you're being too modest, Irving.
Well, for the period of time from 61 to 70 until he died, when I was his administrative assistant, I was involved, of course, in all basic operations within the union, as well as all major collective bargaining. I think from my own point of view, what I enjoyed most in that work was that very frequently I would be at Walter's home. Let's say he'd been away for 3 or 4 days, and he'd call and ask me to bring the mail out and discuss whatever problems had come up in the office. And anything of major significance within the union came through my desk at some point or another, or Walter would call me in to talk about it. The conversations with him at his home were an enjoyment all by themselves. We discussed not only what was going on in the union, but what was going on in the world, what was going on in the nation. He would discuss all kinds of issues and ideas that he had, and he would ask for ideas that I might have thrown at him. One thing, for instance, we have an educational center up north now near Onaway, and it's called the Walter and May Ruther Family Education Center. Family education.